In the last video, I showed you a splendid attacking game played by one of the channel viewers featuring G5, a very trendy attacking idea. And I'd like to show you another game with this idea. Played in the Chinese Team Championship just last week between Jun Zhao and Xiangyu Xu. Apologies for the pronunciation, which was no doubt rather incorrect. Anyway, Chinese Team Championship, two grandmasters playing this, and watch the opening. So e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. It's a Rossolimo, the reliable Rossolimo. And black goes for d6, which is certainly not a bad way for black to play. But you have to be aware that kingside development, of course, is very tardy. Now, this exact variation was played in the game between Arian Tari and Nolibek Abdusatorov in Norway chess. It's exactly the same. If you recall, here Abdusatorov played the outrageous rook g8, and that's exactly what happened in this game too. So because white has played h3 at a very early stage, black is going for g5, g4. Fascinating stuff. And d3 was played in this game. h6. So black still wants to play g5. I mean, it is quite an extraordinary idea, just leaving the king in the middle, basically. Now, if you remember, Tari played b4. He wanted to catch black's king in the middle and played this kind of wing gambit. I mean, it was actually a fantastic idea, but at a certain point the game spun out of control and Abdusatorov landed a very nasty blow and managed to win the game. But it was touch and go, and Tari actually achieved a winning position. Well, this was exactly the same in this game in the Chinese Team Championship. So I'm sure they would have had their eye on Norway chess as well. Instead of playing b4, white played e5 here. In a way, a similar idea in that white wants to blast open the centre while black's king is there. White doesn't want to get caught by g5, g4. So it's an interesting idea. And after d takes e5, instead of recapturing straight away, white plays knight d2. I think this is not a bad idea. If white just recaptures, then g5, I think it's very reasonable. This pawn is very well protected, so the king is kind of safe for the moment. g4 could be coming. You know, black still has the option perhaps to castle queenside, perhaps to play e6 and bishop d6. It's really dangerous. I mean, taking this pawn looks too shaky. I think, you know, given that black is going to gain a tempo here. Anyway, instead of that, white played knight d2, which I think is quite reasonable. So the idea is to recapture the pawn with knight c4 and then take on e5. And if white has a knight on e5, then that is very strong. It's hard to see how black's attack is going to break through on the king side. So there's a kind of chain reaction here. Black didn't want to allow knight c4, so played b5, preventing this one. And now white took. So in a sense, you could say that white has gained the tempo because this knight move is probably more useful than b5. Now g5 is quite possible here actually. One could give up this pawn. It's not quite as good as the other variation. But black played e6, which is probably more prudent actually, covering the c5 pawn. Knight b3. So black has to deal with this threat somehow. and white is distracting black from g5, g4. So I don't think it's quite as impressive as Tari's method of responding to this rook g8 idea. Tari really did blast through the middle. Nevertheless, white is causing a few problems here, so I think it's a very interesting idea. Black played bishop d6, and I think white's response here was very pragmatic and pretty good, actually. So how would you respond to bishop d6? Of course, it's natural to put the rook back. But then comes g5, and it's not clear what this knight is doing on b3, actually. I think black can attack with a very clear conscience here, and queen c7 is coming. King is pretty safe in the middle, still has the option to go queenside if necessary. White played rook takes c5, and I prefer this to retreating the rook. So an exchange sack, I guess, does black actually have to accept that? Well, black did accept it anyway. And then played bishop c6. So I think probably a very good idea to retain that bishop. So what's white got for the exchange? Well, a bishop and a pawn for the rook. And also a very well placed knight on c5. Pretty stable. And there's the chance to attack those queenside pawns as well. There's an argument for playing b4 here, actually, just to cement that knight on c5 and play bishop b2. And that's kind of the extra bishop. That's the bishop that can't be opposed by black, and that's very interesting. But a4 looks very logical as well, to attack these, and then black always has to worry about what's going on the a file. g5. So black gets his move in. And queen e1. It's an interesting little nudge, actually. So, perhaps looking at knight takes e6, that might be dangerous. And queen takes and here. So queen d6 attacks the knight and guards the pawn on e6. This is a really difficult position. Now white plays queen c3 here, which I think is an understandable move. b4 is still very interesting, although this is very scary, and I can understand why white rejected this line. In fact, the computer thinks that after bishop b2, black can get away with pawn takes. White can get away with taking on f6 incredibly, and survives the attack. But listen, you're never going to play that with white. I think b4 just doesn't feel right at all. I can understand why queen c3 was played. So attacking this one, which was defended. b4. So that allows the bishop out, and g4 comes anyway, and bishop b2. So this is another very important moment in the game where black gets it wrong, actually. Although, in a practical game, I think to play accurately here is just so difficult. There are kind of so many tempting moves here. Maybe knight d5. Well, rook g6 is the computer move. And in some variations, black is actually able to swing across and double on the g-file. And black apparently is better there. But black played knight h5, which is also a very tempting move, looking to come in on f4 in some variations. White took on g4. And knight e4 shuts out that bishop. and the computer now thinks that white is better. It's incredible how the advantage swings back and forth, but I think in these kind of irrational positions where it's really hard to judge what's going on, and that's just inevitable. Black took and played rook h4, threatening mate down here. So white blocked it out with e5 and queen c7 check. I think that's a very logical move because black would like to bring the second rook over to attack the king, but of course pushing the king to the back rank stops the rook from swinging over. And white played a takes b5. You can see that black's queenside is collapsing here. The question is, does black have any kind of attack on the other side of the board? King g7 played, so that ensures that white isn't going to be able to exchange the queens, which could just be winning. Have a little think here. How would you play with white? White to play. What would you do here? Well, white kind of panicked. I have a funny feeling that time pressure might have been involved here because this next move really isn't good. In fact, it's possible to take on a6. And, for example, after knight f4, which looks pretty scary. In fact, queen b7 is a really nice, actually defensive move, making sure that there aren't going to be any threats down on g2. And this, this should be winning for white, holding this one, and I think that's too many pawns to manage, particularly when this one is offside. But instead of taking on a6, white played c4. This was a panicky move. And the queen came down. And bishop c1 played. Okay, black to play. What are you going to do here? Black to play. After this next move, white resigned. Knight g3. Boom! What a shocker. Threatening mate. And if that's taken, check. And mate with on this diagonal. Wow. What a fantastic move. Let's just leave that knight there. It's not quite an octopus knight, but it's a pretty strong one anyway. We like that a lot. Yeah, so there you go. Another example of g5, and this move, rook g8, with the idea g5, g4. Well, just watch out for it if you play the Rossolimo. By the way, h3 isn't strictly necessary. Of course, this is the root of the trouble, really. If h3 isn't on the board, then g5, g4 doesn't make a lot of sense. The problem is that after c3, when black plays a6, the bishop comes back. Bishop g4 is not exactly a problem for white, but it prevents white from cleanly occupying the centre with d4. And it's been shown that actually black has a very solid position here after e6. You can see that white's development isn't brilliant, and black is going to castle, actually has quite a decent position. Sooner or later, b5, b4 comes with decent counterplay. Anyway, I enjoyed that game. Another g5 classic, and that is a fantastic final position. Thanks for watching.